and welcome to the Happier Marriage Podcast, a podcast for spouses longing to have a happier marriage so they can feel more connected, desired, and supported. Now, to start the show, here is your host and Sherpa, licensed marriage and family therapist and certified relationship coach, Kingsley Grant.
Thanks for joining me on this show. This is episode 21, and today we'll be unpacking this topic. Stop loving your husband and do this instead for a happier marriage. And let me say this, that you might be triggered by some of what I share, but remember, that is one of the purpose of this show, to stir things up and then to take you in for a safe landing, right? So this show is brought to you by kingsgrant.com. And our hope is that you will be challenged, inspired, and encouraged in this episode, as is in every other episode. So stay tuned.
So, the big question is this. How is it possible that you have a happier marriage when you feel like you've tried everything? Your spouse isn't making an effort. You're exhausted. You feel like giving up. Or there's so much hurt that's taken place between you and your spouse. That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen of Happier Marriage World? I hope you're ready for another round of the Happier Marriage Podcast. Today, we're talking about what your husband needs from you instead of love, so that you can have a happier marriage. You may say, Kingsley, what would he need instead of love? Well, you'll find out in a few moments. Now, you may or may not agree with what I have to say, but you can always share your thoughts through a comment or an email if you do not agree. And if you also agree, then also we'd like to hear from you as well. You can always as well make a comment right below where you are consuming this podcast if you can. Make sure whatever you do, though, right, to stick around to the end, because I have a special gift for you. Thanks for joining me for this episode. As you have already heard, we're talking about what you need to do instead of loving your husband so that you can have a happier marriage. And like I teased out earlier, you might say, Kingsley, what else do I need to do? Well, you may immediately think I'm going to talk about sex, right? Well, that is important for most husbands. They as men in general, that is almost like somehow the way to kind of solve a lot of problems. But of course, that it doesn't solve the problem. It may give temporary relief in some regards, especially if that man is so, selfish and not thinking about you as his wife. And so once he has basically taken care of himself, then he's okay, right? But is he really okay? If he was okay, if sex solved every problem, as you know, then you should have a happier marriage, unless that is not happening as often in your marriage. It's amazing that I've spoken to some men, some husbands, actually husband and wife in couple sessions, and amazing how in some instances where a couple will be going months into a year, and sometimes more than 1 year. I was surprised to hear from a couple who said it's been 3 years and they have not had sex. Now, because they were not there for sex therapy, I didn't explore some other things because you could wonder and ask certain questions. And of course, that's not the purpose of what they were presenting for, but it makes you wonder. But it does happen for a number of reasons, right? And we won't get into all of that because this is not the purpose of this episode today. We will do that for another time. But having counseled and coached hundreds of couples over the past several years as a licensed marriage and family therapist and certified relationship coach, and from what I've experienced as a husband of more than 3 decades, I'm able to talk about this topic in confidence, right? Because I know I've experienced some of these things personally, but also from my counseling sessions with so many couples, and also doing men counseling, right? Men's retreat or a man and man counseling session. I have talked about some of these things, and what I'm going to share with you is going to be very interesting for you, because you may not realize the importance of this, and you may know about it, but you don't realize the depth of it. And hopefully this episode will help to shed some light or some deeper light on this one topic. Now, I'm going to make some general statements up front here. And I want to start off by saying, in general, right, women are more an emotional creature than guys are. That is a general statement. For the most part, that is true of most women most women, period. Right. And there are always exceptions to everything. And I'm sure you'll find some men that are as emotional, if not more so, than some women. You may be saying, yes, I know of one or two men who are that way. But for the most part, that is the way it is. And it's also true that you'll find some women who are less emotional, right? They're just not the emotional type and than the average woman might be. And again, that is just an exception that you may find that as well. But for the most part, it's safe to say that women in large are more emotional than men. Would you agree with that? Right? Would you agree? I think you would. And I'm going to take it as a yes, you are in agreement. But as we go and unpack this episode, you may see a bit more of what I may hope to shed some light on why I made that statement. Now, because because as a wife, you're more emotional, right? You come from a more of an emotional standpoint, a more relational, and connect through the heart and the emotions. What happened is, this is where one of the problems in relationships and marriages stem from. Not because you're doing something wrong. It's just how you're wired. And it's just how you go about relating. And so you find that by default, that is what you're going to bring to your relationship with your husband. Now, he, on the other hand, because he's wired differently, may not receive that well, right? Because you're going to rely on your emotions to connect with him. And you'll use a lot of feeling words, for example, and with the hope that he will hear you. Like I say, and of course, there's a whole thing I teach about what is feelings versus opinions, because some people sometimes are sharing their opinions and their thoughts, and they're thinking, I'm sharing my feelings, right? And just as a rule of thumb, I teach on this, that your feelings you should be able to express your feelings in the most 4 words, right? Anything beyond that is really your opinion and the thoughts you're having, and you're sharing that with your partner. Now, when you as a wife then begin to share about how you're feeling about your husband, about the relationship, right? And somehow he does not reciprocate that. He doesn't respond in a manner that makes it sound or feel to you as if he understands and he hears you. Then it's a surprise and you are disappointed because he's not responding as you hope he would. Because in general, that is what you would expect, especially if you're around your girlfriends and you get there talking and you hear, "Aw," it's like this idea of like, "Aw," isn't that? And that's more emotions and feelings, and everyone seems to be on the same page because, again, you're women and you're wired that way. But around men, for the most part, like I said, there's some men who will say, "Ah," themselves, right? But in general, you don't find a man who will do that in general. He's going to just bow his head or okay. And doesn't seem to show emotion when you're hoping he would. He doesn't respond as you hope he would. And now what you happen is you're going to interpret that to mean a lot of things, some of which he wasn't even thinking about. As a matter of fact, most of which didn't even cross his mind. But because you felt rejected, you felt like he didn't hear you, you're going to push from that angle that he should hear you. And the reason why you're saying he didn't listen to you is because he didn't respond to you, basically in kind, the way you have outlined your feelings to him. And you're wondering why. Because he doesn't need that. He really doesn't need that. Now, does he want to have love? And of course he does. We all want to be loved, right? But that's not really his true need. That's not what he really, bottom line, what he really needs from you. Now this is basically can be a complicated conversation because there are a lot of nuances, right? Different things that may contribute to why he may not seem so enthused about what it is you're presenting and outlining to him, especially if you've had a conflict and you're trying to solve the conflict. You're trying to find a way to bridge the gap, and you're trying to be lovey-dovey and hug and all that stuff. And he's like, okay, and some men will feel like they're being smothered. Some men feel like enough is enough. And some men are just like, just cold. It would seem cold, non-responsive. And again, you're interpreting that to being what it may not be what he's communicating, but that's how you are interpreting what is going on. But imagine what you're trying to do in your communication, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, and you're communicating love to him and loving him and trying to love him to death, so to speak, right? Because you're thinking that he needs that. And you're wondering why he's not responding, because it may come on the heels of an argument you had, maybe a disagreement, a conflict, and you're trying to bridge that gap. And in your mind, that's the best way to go about doing that, right? I know some couples will use sex where that wife will say, I know how to get to him, and she'll be very sensual and, do all the different things to get him turned on. And that may solve some issues for some men, but it doesn't do for all men, right? But for some, it may. For the most part, I think men in general won't turn down that offer. They'll find a way to compartmentalize, as men do, but it doesn't mean that what's going on is totally forgotten. So what is it that men needs more so than the love that you're giving him? What is it that he really, really wants from you? Well, I want to tell you the number one thing he wants from you, what he really, really needs from you, not just want, needs from you, right? So there's a want and a need. He wants to be loved. He wants to be admired. He wants to be cared for. He wants to, all that stuff he wants. But what he really, really needs from you is this. He needs respect, right? He said, Kings, but I need respect too. Well, yeah, it's different. It's different. You want respect, but what you need is love, right? He wants love, but what he needs from you is respect. That's where the difference lies. He wants to know that he's respected as a man, as a provider, as a husband, as a father. Now, let me give you the definition of what respect is according to the dictionary. It says respect is a feeling of deep admiration, a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, their qualities, or their achievements, right? So it's when they've been working and they've been getting out there, doing whatever they have to do. And what happened is they want to know that you admire them deeply as a man, as a provider, as a husband, as a father. They want to know that their wife deeply respect them for their abilities, their qualities, their achievements, right? Unfortunately, sometimes what I find and see many times is some women are just downright disrespectful, as is some men. Of course, let me add that in. But they would disrespect a woman has for a man, and how deeply that cuts him is not the same for a woman. When he disrespects her, it doesn't cut her as deeply. Because if he truly loves her and shows her the love she wants, she needs, then those moments of disrespect is cutting, but it would not be as damaging. But for a man, when you disrespect him, you diss him, especially in any public setting, before the kids, before others, in public setting, that cuts deeply. And that's what he needs from you above everything else. And if he gets respect from you, then everything else will fall in order, right? Why is that so? I'm going to get into some areas that you may not necessarily hear in other arenas, but I'm going to get into why. Why is it that men are cut out for respect more than anything else, right? And why is that what he needs from you more than anything else? Okay. Now we're going to get into some deep kind of moments, right? And so I want to stay tuned now and just put your seatbelt on as we go into this area. Why does he need such respect from you? So why is it then that a man needs to be respected? And I wanted to, as I mentioned, go into an area that for some people, it may be like, okay, then, create some questions but anyway, I'm going to go there. And that is because God created that in men, in the male species, that we ought to be respected. As a matter of fact, the Bible says about this whole issue, it says, wives, respect your husbands, right? So God has, for a reason, he said, for you to have a happier home, a happier marriage, you ought to give your man, your husband, what he needs, and that is respect. Now, I've heard sometimes a wife would say he doesn't deserve it. It's as if he has to earn respect. And that's where things begin to break down even more, because she believes that for him to get that from her. But there's no way that God says, for you as a wife to determine whether or not you respect him based upon what he deserves or not. It simply says that is what he needs. But what happened is the thing that drives him. When he feels respected, like I described the definition I gave you, a feeling of deep admiration for someone, when your husband feels that deep admiration from you, that you are celebrating him, that he means what he does means something, he will want to do more. He will want to go to the ends of the earth for you, because you're doing something that truly within him is what he thrives on. It's what causes him to want to do, as I mentioned, more and more and more. So that's why God says for you as a wife to respect your husband. Of course, God also gave the men his marching orders as well. The marching order for men, for a husband, God said for you to love your wife as you would love your own body. So God calls him to do something very equal that's not as easy for him to do, right? So both sides are called to do something that sometimes is going to require work. Because again, for you as a husband, your wife should not be deserving of, like she has to do something to get your love. No, it ought to be given to her because it's what makes her tick, is what causes her to want to do the things that truly you are looking for from her. But as we're talking about here, what the man needs, and the whole conversation is around that your husband doesn't need your love. He wants your love. What he needs from you is a respect, because that's what gets him going. When he is celebrated for his abilities and his achievements and how he's a protector and a provider. I mean, there's nothing more that he needs than that above everything else that you do. So it's a man thing. It's what he needs from you. So when you're doing the love thing, he wants that. It's great. But don't forget, don't in how get this mixed up that's enough. What he wants, what he needs is your respect, right? Speak to him respectfully, honor him, celebrate him like I just before. Now, I know that you say, well, what about me? Yes, I mentioned before, because I'm talking about husbands here, right? I don't want to kind of convolute the conversation. I do know that you need his love for you to be a priority, for you to be his number one, the person he adheres to, and so on. And I get it, and you need that, right? But because I'm speaking here mainly about what your husband really needs more than your love, and that's respect. And here's what I find where as a wife, it's a struggle, because you feel like, why should I have to respect him? And you hear that so much that you're like even pushing back, because you're even pushing back against that narrative that you are rebelling against. I don't have to respect anybody. And maybe you grew up in a home where respect was not taught, where it was not elevated. In some homes I find, when I work with parents and children and they're saying, he or she is so disrespectful. I said, well, does he or she know what respect is? Have you outlined that? Have you created consequences for disrespect in your home? And so some people are raised without this idea of respect, and it's hard for them to give it. And so I'm suggesting, if you are one of those persons that you're struggling with giving your husband respect, I can guarantee you're not going to have a happier home. Can give him everything else, and you wonder, why is he seemingly looking for, staying at work later, not coming home as you would like him to, looking for every opportunity to be away from the home, and you wonder why? I can tell you one of the reasons is because he doesn't feel respected in his home, right? He gets that, especially if has a title or a position at work and people respect him at work, and it's what drives him and stroke his ego, and he's getting that at work. Where do you think he's going to go more? Where he doesn't get it or where he gets it? Now, I'm not making an excuse for him. It's just what it is. He's going to go where he gets the respect. And so if you want home to be the place that's happier home, right? And a happier marriage, you want to really double down on this, or work, your way into where you truly respect your husband, right? When he knows that you believe in him and supports him, he is going to rise up and be the person that you want him to be. So as we're kind of winding down here at this end of this episode, I want to challenge you to truly think about this, reflect upon this, and ask the question: are you respecting him as you should? Or are you holding back respect because you think he needs to earn it or he doesn't deserve it? Well, is it any wonder that you might not be having as happier a home or as happier a marriage as you would really like? This is one of the reasons. And I want to tell you, as a man, as a husband myself, so I'm speaking to you from a man's position, what we want above everything else is to know that our wife and our children respect us. We truly, really, it means the world to us. We need that. We need that. And any place we find that is not happening, something breaks for us. Something creates a wedge in our relationship with those who are being disrespectful. And so let me challenge you then to think about what I'm saying. And even though something may grate at you or may I can't believe you're telling me to, I know it is something that we have problems with, especially when we don't feel like a person is deserving of or earns it. But God says, not because he earns it or deserves it, he says he needs that from you. And that's why he said a wife ought to respect her husband, and a husband ought to love his wife, because that is what you need. Love from him. You want respect as well. Don't get me wrong. You want that. And who doesn't? But what you truly need is his love. He wants you to love him. And we all want people to love us. But what he needs most from you is respect. Hey, think about that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and see if this resonates, if you're on the same page with me on this or otherwise. I'd love to hear from you either way. But also, I mentioned before that I have something for you just because you've listened all the way to the end and kind of, take some deep breath and so on. So don't miss what's coming up, as the announcer will let you know how you can get that gift that I promised you at the beginning. So stay tuned and hear how to get that special gift.
We've come to the end of another exciting show, and if you enjoyed this podcast, 1. Make sure you give this show a rating and review. 2. Subscribe to the show to get all new releases. And 3. Get your complimentary copy of the 5 Secrets to a Happier Marriage ebook at kingsleygrant.com/HMS ebook. Again, it's kingsleygrant.com/HMS ebook. See the link in the show notes. Do it today. Don't delay. Thanks so much for listening, and make sure you tell one other spouse about this show, or better yet, share it with them. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May he turn his face toward you and give you his peace, both now and forever.